Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode. In the previous episode, you remember we talked about rhythm and meter and all of the timing aspects of music. So I encourage you to go ahead, review that, make sure that you know kind of the basics of that. So today we're going to be talking about tone and or pitch, which is the other important part of music. So let's get started. So first we need to talk about pitch. What is it? Well, the pitch of a note is how high or low that it sounds to us. As we move from left to right on the keyboard, the notes get successively higher. And as you can see, we have 12 unique tones and they're named with the letters A through G. There are multiple registers of the same pitch. So there's multiple Cs, multiple Ds, so on and so forth. Now, you might be wondering about what about the black notes? How are those named? They have these really weird symbols next to them. So to understand that, we first need to talk about what is a half step. So a half step is the smallest possible distance between two notes. So between C and this note, this is a half step. Between here and here, this is a half step. Between here and here, this is a half step. So it's the distance between two adjacent notes. We name the black notes as kind of modifications to the white notes. So a sharp symbol will give you the note that's one half step above it. So a C sharp is the note between C and D because it's the note right above C. A flat will take a note down a half step. So if we're talking about D flat, which is actually the same note, it is the note that is one note directly below D. There isn't always an intervening black note between every pair of white notes. Between E and F, there's nothing, and between B and C, there's nothing. So those are actually only a half step apart. So how do we notate these notes on the staff? Well, as you remember, there's 4 spaces and 5 lines, and each specific space or line denotes a specific pitch. The other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times extra lines can be added to the staff to expand the range of notes that we can specify. But all of this means nothing without the clef. And the clef is a little symbol on the right-hand side here. This one up here is called a treble clef. And the treble clef means that this particular note will be a C. And it won't just be any C, it'll be middle C, which is the C that's in the middle of the piano. That means that as we move to the next space above that line, we get the next note, which is D. And then we go up to the next line above that space and we get E. So it looks like this. Now, let's talk about this guy. This symbol is a bass clef, which means that the lines and spaces now have different meanings. This note is actually a C. In fact, it is middle C. And then this is the note below it, so it's going to be a B. And then the note below the B would be an A, and so on and so forth. So now you're probably wondering, what about the sharps and flats? What about the black notes? How do we notate those? We notate them with symbols called accidentals. And despite its name, the use of these symbols is actually quite purposeful. All we have to do is put an accidental in front of the note to modify its pitch. So this is normally a D on the bass clef, but this symbol is a flat, so it's D flat. Sometimes we want to specify that there's no accidentals, that there should be no modifications to the pitch. The symbol is a natural, which gives you D natural, also known as D. Now, over here in the bottom, we actually have a sharp symbol, which would give us D sharp. There's also a double flat, which gives you the note 2 half steps below D, or a double sharp, which gives you the note 2 half steps above D. Let's talk a little bit too about how measures are actually implicated in this whole system. So this is an A in the treble clef, but there's a flat symbol, so it's an A flat. This note is also an A flat because a flat or a sharp symbol applies to the entire bar for that given space or line. Now, this is obviously a natural, but what does that make this note? Did we just say that a flat symbol applies to the entire measure? But as soon as you encounter a natural symbol within the measure, it cancels out the accidental for the rest of the bar. So both of these notes are actually a natural. Now, you might be inclined to say that this next note is also an A natural, and you'd be right. But the reason is that we're now in a different bar. Since we've moved into a new measure, all of the accidentals from the previous bar no longer apply. And if we want to get those accidentals back, we must reapply them. So reapplying this flat symbol makes it an A flat. Then we go over to our next note in the next bar. We've reset everything, so we once again are left with A natural. So do you remember our example last time of Faragut's? We played out the rhythm on this one to demonstrate how the rhythm notation works. This time I added the pitches. So this first note over here is an E flat. Looks like an E on the treble clef, but it's a flat because the symbol is right there. Now this other note over here, this is also E flat, even though there's no symbol next to it, because we're in the same measure. Now the next note is also an E flat, but we have to reapply the symbol because it's a new bar. We also have A flat over here because this note is something that looks like an A. We put a flat symbol right next to it. That makes it A flat. I would highly suggest pausing the video right now, making sure that you understand what we had talked about. Really focus not so much on the notation, but instead focus on the information from the very first slide, where it lays down what the different pitches are and how they're named and how they relate to each other. All right, so we just talked about notes and how they're named and all of that good stuff. Now let's talk about the distance between notes or pitches, which is also known as an interval. We've talked about this a little bit already with notes being a half step apart, but you could be 2 half steps, 3 half steps, 4 half steps apart. In practice, that's not how we refer to the distance between notes, though. So musicians have a more nuanced method of referring to intervals, and intervals are characterized by their size and their quality, which I think is kind of confusing because they both affect the actual distance between notes. Those are the terminologies that musicians and composers have left us with. The size is given by how many letters are involved, disregarding what's going on with the accidentals. And you're just going to ask yourself how many letters are between two notes, and you're going to use inclusive counting. So C up to E, C, D, E is a third. As you can see, E up to B, E, F, G, A, B is going to be a fifth. So let's practice now. D up to F, D, E, F, it's going to be a third. What about B up to A? B, C, D, E, F, G, A. 7. So it's the seventh. And E up to F, E, F is just a second. So now let's talk about interval quality. There's multiple kinds of thirds, multiple kinds of fourths, and so on and so forth. Interval quality is basically asking you, okay, we know we have a fifth, but what kind of fifth do we have? This looks really complicated. It is scary, but we're going to break it down. Focus mainly on what I say about major, minor, and perfect intervals. So we first have our intervals that can be perfect. Fifths, fourths, octaves. There's also unison, which I didn't say earlier. It is the distance of a note to itself. So we have the default number of half steps that each of these intervals contain. But we also have a diminished version, which is a half step smaller than the default, and an augmented, which is a half step larger than the default. Unison obviously has 0 half steps by default. The fourth has 5 half steps. The perfect fifth has 7, and the octave has 12. Then we have our intervals that cannot be perfect. These are your seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. We have major and minor flavors of each of these, as well as diminished, which is a half step smaller than the minor, and an augmented, which is a half step larger than the major. Also, the major is a half step larger than the minor version, so keep that in mind. So we therefore have that A minor second is 1 half step, but A major second is 2. A minor third is 3 half steps, but a major third is 4. So let's practice a little bit. What is E up to G sharp? Well, first we know it's a third because E, F, G. How many half steps? E to F is a half step, to F sharp is 2, to G is 3, and G sharp finally is 4. It's a third with 4 half steps, and from the chart it is a major third. What about F to A flat? Well, F to F sharp is 1 half step, to G is 2, and to A flat is 3. It's a third with 3 half steps, so it must be a minor third. How about B up to F? B, C, D, E, F. It's a fifth, but what kind of fifth is it? How many half steps? B to C is 1 half step, to C sharp is 2, D is 3, D sharp 4, E 5, F 6. Now you notice that a perfect fifth is 7 half steps, not 6. So this must be a diminished fifth because it's 1 half step smaller than the perfect fifth. So perfect fifths are really important in music. So how do we make it a perfect fifth? Well, we don't want to change the letters because that would give us a different interval size, but we can certainly raise F to F sharp, and that would give us the half step increase that we need to have a perfect fifth. So I have a little tip for everyone here. If a fifth contains matched accidentals, so 2 naturals, 2 flats, 2 sharps, it will be perfect unless the letters are B and F. So are you feeling overwhelmed yet? I get it. Intervals are not easy. The thirds, fifths, octaves, those are the ones that you need to know because they are critically important for understanding chords, which we'll talk about in the next episode. Musicians don't use the formulas that we just talked about, they simply memorize them. So you might be asking yourself, Alex, how do you just know this stuff? Well, I remember it because I make up little tips and tricks. And a really helpful tip is know what white note pairs make thirds and fifths, and know what quality they're going to make. So we know that for the perfect fifths, all of these white note pairs are going to be perfect except B and F, and we therefore need B flat to F or B to F sharp to be a perfect fifth. What about the thirds? Well, C to E, F to A, and G to B are major. D to F, E to G, and A to C are minor. You see how little information that was to actually memorize? What you can do once you have that A to C is a minor third, well, you know that if you see A to C sharp, or if you see A flat to C, it's a half step bigger than the minor third, so it must be a major third. So stay tuned for next time when we talk about scales and chords.